Okay, here we are again at the great threshold of Google, trying to figure out what things mean. Sustainable development. It's kind of funny. We're dealing with terms that are pretty soft, and so I'm just going to talk about them and then try to lead us through kind of a broad regional example like I did last time, and then to a more concrete local example, which is kind of the theme for the week. So sustainability, it's kind of great if you Google it. You get these very green things, which is awesome. Apparently, Wikipedia tells us that sustainability is the ability to exist constantly. Um, Perhaps consistently might be a better word, right? So instead of kind of the capitalist paradigm of constant geometric growth, perhaps sustainability is something more of a, kind of a flat line or something, or a cyclical line that we can depend on. Development is funny. Of course, if you Google development, you get babies turning into businessmen, or business people, I should say. You get trees growing. But the idea is that development is kind of something is progressing from one thing to another to another. And in our capitalist society, development usually means it's driven by money and economics. And so, I think you might be thinking of development as big cities, or, okay, here's a building, we got to turn it into a new building and we got to make more money somehow. It doesn't always mean bulldoze something, put something bigger there. Though that's kind of, I think, what we tend to think of when we think of development. Development in a communist country like, in the old Soviet blocks, there were very specific types of developments that would happen for housing and businesses that look extremely different than the modern kind of capitalist cities we see now. But anyway, I want to share a particular example in Maine. We're going to actually be working in Vermont this week, but the Maine power line corridor is a very contentious issue in Maine right now, and I think it's really interesting. So right off the bat, Maine power line corridor, the first two websites we get are the two people. Well, nope, the three. Let's see. There's a few of them. Anyway, lots of people who care. We've got the New England Clean Energy Connect, and they say, get the facts. So we know right now that something's wrong. So these are the people who want to build a corridor. And the idea is that they want to build a corridor between Quebec. I'm just going to bring up Google Maps because it's less contentious. Between Quebec Hydro, which is what they're considering some kind of green energy, because it's based on water and it's renewable. So hydro, and they want to put a corridor so that they can feed that energy straight down into the Boston area, kind of through Maine. And so, yeah, this is great. The first thing you see is a happy worker. And there are a lot of economic analysts that think it would be a great thing for the economy in Maine. Some people are trying to tout it as, we're going to take a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. You can kind of see through the iconography and the images that they really want to build this thing as something that's good for the environment and good for the world. And I'm not going to pick a side on this whole thing. I'm just going to kind of describe the two viewpoints. The other people who are really against it, let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. CMP transmission line proposal, a bad deal for Maine. So the first time I Googled this, it was just these two things, and it's actually kind of interesting that they're similarly putting their opinion right out on their title here. So let's just let's click this one. And the people who don't want it to happen think that it will cut a swath, which it will cut a little bit of a swath through some very prime habitat in northern Maine that should not be disturbed. And so what's interesting to me is, of course, the Natural Resource Council of Maine. They do a lot of great work. Their imagery is also, it used to be a little bit more, there were pictures of giant power lines, and it was kind of more alarmist. And now I think their messaging has turned from alarmism to just let's preserve kind of a naturally beautiful area. And that they've got a couple of good, a guy fly fishing, trying to kind of appeal to as people in might say the hook and bullet club, people that are traditionally more conservative, but there's actually a lot of local people on both sides of the aisle that are pretty against this development. So okay, some people don't want it to happen because it's bad for the local environment. Some people want it to happen because they think not only is it good for the economy, but perhaps it's good for the global environment. What is the reality of it on the ground? What does it look like? And I mean, it really is interesting because on the ground, it's really not, if you were to just measure the number of acres, it's not that crazy, right? Like the new corridor is only going so far and then it joins an existing corridor, and that existing corridor would be widened. So it'd be widened by an extra third of the width. It still is a lot of trees, right? They're still taking out a lot of trees. But I think from what I've heard is that the concern isn't necessarily the total number of acres of deforestation, because there's a lot of forest in Maine. It's more that it's interrupting habitat. So perhaps it's bad, for wildlife and other kinds of things. And it would be an eyesore, it'd be something where this is all kind of untouched, or a lot of it is untouched woodland, or that's what we're used to seeing. And this would be kind of crossing that aggressively. And so there is this movement where it's like if the towns along that accept or reject the plan, then perhaps this development would or would not happen at a regional scale. And this is still got tied up in the Maine courts. There's a lot of stuff about it, but I don't. I used to have a few strong opinions about it. I still, you can talk to me about it sometime, and I'd love to chat. It's interesting, is to say the least. And I think in terms of sustainable development, it shows the inherent problems that there are kind of deciding where things should go, if things should happen, and what does sustainability and what does development really mean. So we're going to be looking this week at sustainable development in terms of solar in Vermont. And so solar power, I think, as you guys know, it's kind of called photovoltaics. And we're looking in New England at doing some form, and this is going rampant right now, small solar arrays. So anywhere between 15 and 20 acres. And that's kind of where they can make enough money to actually have it make sense. So under 15 acres, it's not really viable. And a lot of places have zoning code or other things where you can't have a development larger than 20 acres of some type of array like this. So we're going to look at Vermont and see for Chittenden County, where are the most practical places kind of in a constraint and possibility scenario, where could it even be possible to build these things? And then for the charrette this week, we're going to be thinking about where is it potentially ethical to build these things. And so it's definitely another hypothetical scenario, but it's based on actual work I've done for a client before. So before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about economics and zoning, which is a big part of obviously the driving forces of development. So next I'm going to just show you a couple maps and we'll talk about them. All right, this is a project I worked on I think it was 2 years ago now, in Newton, Massachusetts, and we'll look on Google Earth in a second. What this this was a proposed regulating plan, and I'm almost certain this isn't what it is anymore. It went through probably, 15, 20 different drafts before it was done. And there isn't a legend here, but what it does describe is what should the heights of buildings be allowed to be for this one corridor, this kind of one Washington Street corridor. And it might kind of seem silly, like, well, why does it matter how many stories there are? Well, I'll just show you here. If we were to go down to where this is and do our kind of little Google guy and drop the Google guy on the ground, you're going to see that this area is kind of under a lot of stress, right? There's a lot of traffic. It has a highway that goes right underneath it, but even with the highway, I-90, underneath this bridge here, which is kind of subterranean a little bit, there's still a lot of traffic along Washington Street, which parallels it. And you can kind of tell, it's kind of great that this picture's here, because you can tell that there's development that wants to happen, right? There's potentially money to be made by people building buildings and selling either offices or apartments. And it looks like, the character of the town and kind of spreading out and radiating out from this avenue are single-family residences, usually nothing more than 2 or 3 stories. But I think what's hard to remember is that for every story that you add, is an entire another set of footprints that is land that could be either not land, but space that could be sold or used for some type of purpose. And so when you allow buildings to be higher, then you're making the potential for the taxable revenue for the value of that land to be higher as well. So this building right here is going to make a lot more money than this building right here potentially, because it will have many, many, many more opportunities to sell space than what this is using right now. This is a rental that it looks like it has multiple businesses that are renting this space to sell their product in kind of a square footage situation. So it's hard to quantify that stuff, but we'll look at it in a second. So this regulating plan, what it does is it just says, okay, well, we know there's some traffic problems. We want it to be kind of a nice neighborhood, and we want to be able to walk around, and we want these residences that are spanning out from this thoroughfare to be kind of part of a community. And right now, I don't know what it's like right now because I haven't worked on this project for a couple of years. But at the time, I think a lot of the people felt that this street wasn't really connecting people. It was kind of, the traffic was making it hard for people to enjoy their kind of these nodes, these neighborhood centers. And one proposal, which I don't think ended up happening, was to cap this highway. So that, I think you remember the highway went underneath, and there's all these bridges and things that kind of go over the highway. And so one proposal at the time, which I thought was interesting, is, well, if we cap this and we have a couple of big buildings, but then around those big buildings, potentially we limit the development, then we can even have a park or a green space in here and make it more walkable. But the amount of revenue we would get from selling this amount of land would make that possible. So there's a lot to think about. One of the ways people visualize kind of potential for revenue stream from land are dollar per acre maps or dollar per square foot maps, and they're fraught with problems. So I'm going to show you the dollar per square foot map for this area. So this is the same area, and what we've done is we just took the raw parcels and we divided it by the acreage, and what you see are kind of, where there are cross sections, where the streets are crossing and there are businesses, they're being taxed a lot more because that land is more valuable, because people want to go there, and it's, for some reason, it's a hub. But of course, what's interesting about this, there's problems, right? Here's a golf course. This golf course in the parcel data set is being listed as either exempt or something else. And so it's not actually being counted. It's being counted as 0. But this is really high because I think this is the golf course club, right? So really, this value and this value kind of should be mixed together, and it would really spread out. That very tall yellow spot there would kind of even out throughout this. And so even though we've talked about normalization, normalizing something that is monetary, and even then it's a rate, right? It's dollars per year, or these are still individual legal entities. So let me just pull up another map to show you why this is difficult. I think this is not a bad visualization, but it still has problems. And I'll pull up another one to just kind of demonstrate some of the problems with these kinds of maps. All right, this is another town in Massachusetts called Mashpee, and these maps are also taxable revenue per acre maps, or this one is. So I'm going to show you two maps. They're the same data set, but they're just being shown differently. And so I know I said that they were, the different pieces of land were taxed differently, but what I really meant is that the amount that they're taxed is different, but the rate is usually the same, right? And the rate is usually some kind of total value in dollars of either the land in the building, or the land in the building and other things, or just the land. And they multiply it by what's called a mill rate. And that mill rate is usually set for each town on how much they expect the landowner to pay in property taxes per year. So, what are we looking at here? It's kind of hard to make sense of this. I'm going to start with the other one because I think it's simpler. This map shows raw tax revenue per parcel as a single bar, allowing for kind of payment comparison. So each of these bars is a raw quantity of number of dollars per year spent by each parcel owner. And so what's kind of confusing is that Mashpee Commons looks like, oh my gosh, I mean, yeah, these payments are huge. They're so much higher than over here. Um, but they're spacious. And so it's kind of like, okay, here's the big trees. And then over here you've got tons of little tiny payments, which is more, if these are the redwoods, then this is kind of like, bamboo or something like that. Ultimately, they might have the same biomass, right? It might be the same amount of wood here and there, or money if we're going to extend the metaphor. But if we normalize it, we can kind of see what the overall value, where the overall value is coming for the town. And so if we normalize it by acre, we get this, which is confusing because now we see, oh my gosh, how is there over $20,000 of tax revenue per acre here? We know that they're not even spending more than a couple thousand, maybe 3,000 or 4,000, 5,000 to 10,000 for waterfront properties, but they're not spending over 20 or 40 or $50,000 on it. But if the number of acres is less than 1 acre, then it will jack up that ratio, right? So if this is tax revenue per acre, then if you're paying $100 a year on half an acre, it would be considered $200 per acre because that's half an acre. So, but what it does is it does definitely show that the waterfront property has a lot of value, and that it is actually contributing a lot to the town's yearly revenue. And this is still not insignificant, but it's not necessarily quite as dramatic a burden as this map makes it seem. But I kind of think that both maps are important because this one shows that, a variety of landowners can produce a similar amount of income as a single set of landowners. But this also does show how crazy valuable these individual parcels of land are in comparison with other ones. Whereas, these are still valuable, but people are being charged for a very small piece of land. So it's kind of hard to distinguish between these. But I hope that if you're going to do some of this normalization, we can have some conversations about it, because it's easy to just divide by acre and say, oh, look at that. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. Anyway, for this week, we're going to be looking mostly at terrain analysis with some other things like that to site solar panels. But if you want to use land value as part of your analysis for the charrette on either Friday or Monday, then I hope that this has at least showed you that it's a little more complex and you need to be careful about doing it. So I don't discourage you from doing it, but let's maybe come to office hours so we can chat about it in class. Okay, great. Let's go site some solar panels. See you in the next video.